You're going to keep your mouth shut and do exactly what we tell you. You understand me?" Sergeant Dylan Wixon's forearm crushed harder against Vivian Cross's throat, pinning her against the cruiser in the fading afternoon light on Madison Avenue. Officer Travis Armin stood behind her, both arms locked, cutting off her air. Vivi didn't struggle and beg. She stood completely still, feet planted on the asphalt, eyes forward, breathing through the pressure with a control that looked, from the outside, like surrender. It wasn't surrender. What Sergeant Wixon and Officer Armin didn't know was that the woman they were choking had briefed generals, and her next 10 words were about to end both of their careers. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The bedroom smelled like lavender and old wood. Vivian Cross sat on the edge of her mother's bed and didn't move. The floral curtains, the Bible on the nightstand, spine cracked from 30 years of use. The little ceramic angel on the dresser that had been there since Vivi was 4 years old. Everything exactly where Eleanor Cross had left it. Everything exactly the same. Except Eleanor was gone. Vivi turned the photograph over in her hands. Her mother at 60, standing in the front yard of this very house, squinting into the sun with that look she always had. Like she was daring the world to try something. 81 years old when she passed. 81 years in Millhaven, Georgia. 81 years of holding this family together with both hands. Vivi set the photo down carefully on the nightstand, right beside the Bible. She was 36 years old. She had briefed 4-star generals. She had sat in rooms inside the Pentagon that most people didn't know existed. She held a security clearance so high that most people she met had never even heard the classification level. She was, by every measure she knew how to use, someone who had made it. And right now, sitting in her mother's bedroom in Millhaven, she felt about 12 years old. She'd left this house at 18 and never really come back. West Point first, then Army intelligence, then the contracting work, the clearances, the career that had taken her so far from this street that sometimes it felt like another life entirely. She came back for holidays when she could, once when Reggie had his surgery, and now this. Her Pentagon ID badge was locked in the glove compartment of her rental car outside. She hadn't brought it inside. It didn't belong here, not in this room, not tonight. The front door opened. Heavy footsteps in the hall. She'd known that walk her whole life. Reginald Cross filled the bedroom doorway. 58 years old, broad-shouldered, with their mother's same dark eyes and a face that had seen too much sun and too much stress. He was 22 years older than Vivi. When she was born, he was already a grown man. He'd always been more like a second father than a brother. He looked at her now the way he'd always looked at her, like he was still a little amazed she existed. "You eat anything today?" he asked. "I'm fine." He didn't push. He went to the kitchen, and she heard the clink of cups, the rush of water. When she came out and sat at the table, there were 2 mugs of coffee waiting. Their mother's mugs, their mother's table. They sat together in the quiet. It was Reggie who spoke first. "Millhaven's gotten worse," he said. Not dramatically, like he was reading something off a list. "Wixon's unit. They run the whole west side now, every street, every corner." Vivi wrapped her hands around her mug. "How bad?" "Last month alone, 3 stops on this street." He nodded toward the front window. "Elm Street, right outside this house." He paused. "You remember Mrs. Hadley lives 2 blocks down? Her grandson, 22 years old, coming home from work. They pulled him over, threw him up against the hood. His jaw tightened, broke his wrist." Vivi went very still. "Did she file a complaint?" Reggie looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, older than anger. heavier. "People file complaints," he said. "Nothing happens. That's how it works here." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly on Elm Street, and Vivi watched its headlights slide across the wall. She thought about what she knew about power, about the men she'd watched abuse it in boardrooms, in briefing rooms, in places that operated far above the law. The game was always the same. The stakes just changed. "What's his name again?" she asked. "The sergeant." "Wixson. Dylan Wixson. 22 years on the force and not one thing on his record." Reggie wrapped both hands around his mug. "Not one thing." Vivi nodded slowly, filed it away in the part of her mind where things didn't get forgotten. They talked a little longer about the estate, about the paperwork at the county clerk, about what needed to happen before the end of the week. Practical things. The kinds of things that kept grief at arm's length long enough to get through the day. Eventually, Reggie left. Eventually, the house went quiet. Vivi went back to her mother's bedroom, lay down on top of the covers, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. She didn't know yet that by tomorrow, everything would change. The pharmacy was 2 miles away. That was it. 2 miles there, 2 miles back. And Vivi would have the notarized estate document in hand before the county clerk opened in the morning. The document was the last piece of paperwork standing between her and the formal transfer of her mother's house to Reggie. A single signature from the notary on duty at Millhaven Pharmacy, the only place in town that still offered the service without an appointment. She grabbed her keys off the counter, told herself she'd be back before 5, and stepped out into the Georgia afternoon. The sun was still up, but leaning toward the horizon, casting long gold shadows across Elm Street. The air was warm and thick, the way southern afternoons get in early fall. The streets were quiet. Most people were still at work, or just getting home. She pulled out of the driveway, headed south, and let the hum of the rental car fill the silence. She almost didn't notice the cruiser. It was sitting half a block back with its lights off, tucked against the curb like it was parked. She clocked it out of habit. She always clocked things, always catalogued her surroundings, but didn't think much of it. She turned onto Madison Avenue. The cruiser pulled out behind her. She kept her speed steady, both hands on the wheel. 2 blocks from the pharmacy, the lights came on. Red and blue flooded her rearview mirror. The siren gave one short, sharp blip. "Pull over." Vivi took a slow breath through her nose and guided the car to the curb. She cut the engine, put both hands on top of the steering wheel, and waited. She heard the cruiser doors, 2 of them. The officer who reached her window first was thick-necked, mid-40s, with a face like a closed fist. His name tag read Wixson. He held a flashlight and shone it directly in her face despite the afternoon light still being more than adequate. "License and registration." Vivi didn't move quickly. She moved carefully, deliberately, the way you move when you know you're being watched for any reason to escalate. She retrieved both from the glove compartment, her Pentagon ID was in there too, tucked in its case, and she left it alone for now, and held them out through the window. Wixson took them, barely looked at them. "You know why I stopped you?" "No," Vivi said. "I don't." Taillights out. She kept her voice even. "My tail light was functioning when I left the house." Wixson's eyes moved over her slowly. The car, her clothes, her face. The particular kind of look that wasn't really looking. It was deciding. He'd already decided before he got out of the cruiser. She could see it in him as plainly as she could see the badge on his chest. "Step out of the vehicle." "Can you tell me the reason—" "I said step out of the vehicle, ma'am." She got out, stood on the sidewalk with her hands visible. The second officer, younger, maybe 30, name tag Armin, had come around the front of the car and was hanging back slightly, watching Wixson the way a dog watches its owner at the dinner table. 20 feet away, on the sidewalk across the street, a young woman had stopped walking. She was holding her phone at her side. Then, slowly, Quietly, she raised it. "Hands behind your back," Wixon said. "I haven't been told what I'm being detained for," Vivi said. Her voice was steady, completely steady. "I'm asking you to tell me the reason for this detention." Something shifted in Wixon's face. Not anger. He was already past anger. It was something colder. The look of a man who was not used to being questioned and did not intend to start tolerating it now. He turned his head toward Armin. "Secure her." Armin moved fast. He stepped behind her before she could turn, and his forearm came up hard across her throat. The pressure was immediate, real. Her airway didn't close completely, but the message was unmistakable. Stop moving. Stop talking. Stop existing in a way that inconveniences us. Every nerve in her body fired at once. 8 years of army training lit up in her like a switch had been thrown. She knew exactly how to break this hold. She could do it in under 2 seconds, and Armin would be on the ground before Wixon could blink. She didn't move, because she also knew what happened next, if she did. She had seen the headlines. She had read the names. She knew, with a cold and terrible clarity, that her training was not protection out here on this sidewalk. Not on this street. Not in this city. So she went completely still. And across the street, Erica Hadley kept her phone perfectly steady and kept filming. Armin's forearm pressed harder. Vivi felt the burn in her throat, the way her pulse thudded against the pressure of his arm. The afternoon sun was still warm on her face. A car passed slowly on Madison Avenue and didn't stop. Nobody stopped. She breathed, in through her nose, out slow. Her army instructors used to say that panic was just energy without direction. She had learned, over 8 years of service, how to take that energy and point it somewhere useful. She pointed it now at the only weapon she had left. Her voice. "I need you to stop." She said it clearly. No trembling. No begging. "My name is Dr. Vivian Cross. I am a senior defense analyst contracted to the Pentagon's Office of Special Programs. I hold a TSSCI security clearance, and I am expected at a briefing at Fort Benning at 0600 tomorrow morning." She paused just long enough to let that land. "If you do not remove your hands from my person in the next 10 seconds, the next call on your radio will be from the Department of Defense." Silence. Complete, total silence. Armin's arm dropped. Not slowly. All at once, like a string had been cut. He stepped back and said nothing, his face caught somewhere between confusion and something that looked very much like the beginning of fear. He was 31 years old and had likely never heard anyone speak to a superior officer, which is exactly what she had just positioned herself as, with that kind of absolute, immovable calm. Wixon hadn't moved. He was staring at her with his flashlight still raised, and for the first time since he'd walked up to her window, he looked uncertain. Vivi looked straight back at him and did not blink. "Prove it," Wixon said finally. His voice had lost some of its edge. Not all of it, but enough that she noticed. She turned toward her car. Her throat was already aching, a deep, throbbing soreness that she knew from experience would be worse by morning. She opened the passenger door, reached into the glove compartment, and pulled out the black case. She unzipped it and removed her Pentagon contractor ID. She walked back to Wixon and held it out. He took it. He looked at it for a long time. Longer than he needed to. The photo matched her face. There was no way around that. The name matched. The title, Senior Defense Analyst, Office of Special Programs, was printed in clean black type. And at the bottom, the clearance designation. 4 letters that Wixon clearly recognized were serious, but couldn't fully decode. That was the part that got him. She could see it. The thing he didn't understand was more frightening to him than the thing he did. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped near his eye. He held the ID out without looking at her. "Get your tail light fixed," he said. His voice was flat now, emptied out. He walked back to the cruiser. Armin followed without a word, without looking at her, like a man trying to leave a room he'd never been in. The cruiser pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. Vivi stood on the sidewalk and watched until the taillights were gone. Her hand was steady. Her face was steady. Inside her chest, her heart was hitting hard and fast, the way it used to after a training exercise when the adrenaline finally had permission to show itself. She became aware of movement across the street. The young woman who had been filming walked toward her. She was maybe 29. Natural hair pulled back. Work uniform still on, like she'd just finished a shift. Her eyes were wide, but her expression was clear and determined. "I got everything," she said quietly. "From the second the lights came on. All of it." She turned the phone screen toward Vivi. Vivi watched it. The footage was steady. The audio was clean. Armin's arm across her throat. Wixon standing there watching it happen. Her voice cutting through the silence. The moment Armin stepped back. All of it. In clear afternoon light. Unambiguous and complete. "What do you want me to do with it?" the young woman asked. Vivi looked up from the screen. "What's your name?" "Erica. Erica Hadley." Vivi looked at the footage one more time. Then she looked at Wixon's empty cruiser spot on the curb. Then she looked at the bruises she could already feel forming on her throat. "Hold on to it," Vivi said. "Don't send it to anyone yet. Don't post it. Can you do that?" Erica nodded. "Good." Vivi zipped her ID back into its case. "I'll be in touch." Vivi didn't go to the pharmacy. She drove straight back to her mother's house, parked the rental, and sat in the driveway for a moment with both hands in her lap. The notarized document could wait until morning. She had bigger problems now. Inside, she went directly to the bathroom mirror. The bruising had already started. A band of deep reddish-purple across the front of her throat, wider on the left side where Armin's forearm had pressed hardest. She took her phone out and photographed it carefully. Straight on first, then both angles. She kept her face out of the frame and focused only on her neck, making sure the light was clear and the bruising visible. Then she sent the photos to her own email and saved them to 2 separate folders on her phone. Evidence. That was what her life was now. She changed into a clean shirt and sat down at her mother's kitchen table with her laptop. She opened a fresh document and began typing. Time, location, names, badge numbers she had memorized from their name tags, the exact words spoken, the exact sequence of events. She wrote it the way she wrote intelligence reports. Clean, precise. Nothing left out. Nothing exaggerated. She was halfway through when she heard Reggie's key in the front door. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her throat. The color drained from his face. What happened? It wasn't a question. She told him anyway. All of it, from the cruiser pulling out behind her to Armin's arm to Wixon's face when he read the clearance designation on her ID. She told it straight. No drama. The same way she'd just written it down. When she finished, Reggie pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily, like his legs had decided they were done holding him up. "Wixon," he said quietly. "Wixon," she confirmed. He stared at the table for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and began scrolling. She watched his face while he did it, the way it moved through something complicated, something she didn't have a full name for yet. He found what he was looking for and slid the phone across the table to her without a word. It was a city government page. The Mill Haven Civilian Police Oversight Board. 7 members. She read the appointment records. Then she read them again. Every single member had been appointed by Mayor Leon Landl. Every one. "His brother-in-law is Wixon," Reggie said. "Has been for 12 years. Vivi set the phone down. She felt something cold move through her. Not surprise, exactly. Something worse than surprise. The particular feeling of watching a trap become visible only after you've already stepped into it. "There's more," Reggie said. He took the phone back, pulled up something else, and handed it over again. She read through 3 separate complaint records, all filed against Wixon in the last 2 years. The first was from Harold Bell, 67 years old, a deacon at First Baptist on Cooper Street. His arm had been fractured during a traffic stop. He'd filed a detailed formal complaint with photographs and a witness statement. Dismissed in 26 days. The second complainant, a 40-year-old schoolteacher named Fiona Moore, had filed after her teenage son was stopped and searched without cause 3 times in a single month. Dismissed in 30 days. The third complainant had filed after a confrontation outside a grocery store that left him with a concussion. His complaint was dismissed in 19 days. He was arrested 4 months later on a disorderly conduct charge. The charge was eventually dropped, but sat on his record like a warning sign to anyone watching. 3 people, 3 complaints. 3 doors slammed shut. Vivi closed the laptop. "The oversight board is a rubber stamp," she said. "Always has been," Reggie said. "Landell built it that way." She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Outside, the last of the afternoon light was fading from gold to gray. Somewhere on Elm Street, a dog was barking. Everything was completely ordinary and completely wrong at the same time. She looked at her Pentagon ID on the table beside her laptop. Then she looked at the photograph of her bruised throat still open on her phone screen. Then she looked at Reggie. "Then we don't go through the city," she said. Reggie held her gaze for a long moment. He had 22 years on her. He had watched this city operate for decades. He knew better than anyone what going up against Wixon and Landell would cost. He nodded slowly. "Then what?" "We go over them," Vivi said. "We go federal." They stayed at the kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning, planning exactly how. Vivi was up before sunrise. She hadn't slept much. Maybe 3 hours, broken and shallow, her mind running through checklists the way it did before a big operation. By 5:30, she was at the kitchen table with coffee, her laptop open, and a legal pad covered in handwritten notes from the night before. She started with the Pentagon's legal liaison. His name was Barry Ostroff, a civilian attorney who handled contractor legal matters for the Office of Special Programs. She had called him once before, 2 years ago, over a contract dispute that turned out to be a clerical error. He was thorough and careful, and she trusted him. She sent him a detailed email. The incident report she had typed the night before, the photographs of her bruising, and a summary of Erica Hadley's footage. She flagged it urgent and asked for a callback before 9. Then she opened the DOJ's Civil Rights Division complaint portal. She had never filed a federal complaint before. She had helped other people navigate bureaucratic systems plenty of times, but this felt different. This was her name on the form, her throat in the photographs, her city. She filled out every field methodically, attached every document, double-checked every detail. When she hit submit, she sat back and looked at the confirmation number on the screen for a moment before writing it down on the legal pad. One step, then the next. She called Erica at 8. Erica picked up on the second ring, her voice a little rough, like she hadn't slept well either. Vivi explained what she needed. The footage transferred to a secure file-sharing link that Vivi would set up, and a brief written account of what Erica had witnessed, in her own words, signed and dated. "Is this going to get complicated?" Erica asked. "It's already complicated," Vivi said honestly. "But the footage is the strongest piece of evidence we have. I need it preserved properly." A pause. "Okay," Erica said. "Tell me what to do." Vivi walked her through it, step by step. When it was done, she uploaded the footage to 3 separate secure servers, 1 cloud account, one encrypted external backup she carried in her laptop bag, and one she sent directly to Ostrov's secure intake system at the Pentagon liaison office. Barry Ostroff called at 8:45. He listened without interrupting while she laid out the full account. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Vivian," he said carefully, "the bruising photographs alone are significant. Combined with the footage, this is a serious matter." He told her he would escalate internally and advised her to also contact a civilian civil rights attorney to pursue a parallel track outside of federal contractor channels. "You want multiple ropes on this thing," he said. "Don't rely on one." Good advice. She wrote it down. She was researching civil rights attorneys in Atlanta when Councilwoman Fiona Walters called. Vivi had sent her a message the night before, a brief introduction through Reggie, who knew Walters from community board meetings. She hadn't expected to hear back so quickly. Walters's voice was sharp and direct, the voice of a woman who had stopped softening herself for other people's comfort a long time ago. "I've been trying to move against Wixon for 3 years, she said, without preamble. 3 years of complaints that go nowhere, community meetings that change nothing, and a mayor who acts like I'm speaking a foreign language." She paused. "Send me the footage." Vivi sent it while they were still on the phone. She heard Walters watching it on the other end. The silence was thick. Then, "Lord." Another pause. "You said you have medical documentation of the injuries?" "Photographed it yesterday and formally documented it this afternoon," Vivi said. "I'm taking Reggie with me to the county medical office after lunch." "Good. Don't skip that step." Walters's tone shifted into something focused and almost warm. "You might be exactly what this city has been waiting for." That afternoon, Reggie drove her to the county medical office on Birch Street. The physician on duty, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Carol Sims, examined her throat, photographed the bruising under clinical lighting, and wrote a formal injury report documenting the contusion pattern as consistent with a forearm compression hold. She handed Vivi 2 copies. On the drive back to Elm Street, Reggie didn't say much. Neither did she. Inside the house, Vivi sat down at the kitchen table and laid everything out in front of her. The complaint confirmation number, the medical report, the secured footage, the legal pad that's full of notes. For the first time since the stop, she allowed herself to feel something close to hope. She didn't know yet how quickly that feeling was going to be taken from her. Vivi's phone rang at 6:40 in the morning. She was already awake, already at the kitchen table with coffee, already going over the legal pad from the night before. She looked at the screen. Councilwoman Walters. She picked up. "Have you seen the Gazette?" Walters didn't bother with hello. "Not yet." "Pull it up, right now." Vivi opened her laptop and found the Millhaven Gazette's website. The story was small, 4 paragraphs, buried below the fold on the local news page. Easy to miss if you didn't know to look for it. She read it once fast, then again slowly. Local woman makes unverified federal claims. During routine traffic stop. Her stomach tightened. The article described an unnamed woman who had become agitated and uncooperative during a routine stop on Madison Avenue. It said she had made unsubstantiated claims of government employment when officers attempted to conduct a lawful investigation. It quoted an unnamed police department spokesperson saying the stop had been standard procedure and that the woman's behavior had escalated the situation unnecessarily. There was no mention of a chokehold, no mention of bruising, no mention of a Pentagon ID that Wixon had held in his own hands. She was the problem. That was the story they were telling. "Wixon filed a counter-report yesterday afternoon," Walters said. Her voice was tight with fury she was working hard to contain. "I have a source inside the department. He described you as erratic, aggressive, and claimed you obstructed a lawful investigation. Landell's office fed the story to the Gazette the same evening. A short pause. They move fast. I'll give them that. Vivi stared at the article. She thought about the bruise photographs on her phone. She thought about Erica's footage sitting on 3 secure servers. She thought about the formal DOJ complaint with its confirmation number written in blue ink on her legal pad. She closed the laptop. "How old are you?" Walters asked suddenly. 36. Silence on the line. Then, "I was afraid of that. Listen to me carefully, Vivian. They are going to use that. Every chance they get. They are going to push the idea that you are too young, too emotional, too eager to make a name for yourself, that this is some kind of overreaction from a girl who doesn't know how things work." Her voice was hard and clear. "Do not give them a single thing that fits that picture. Not one." "Understood," Vivi said. She ended the call and looked at Reggie, who had come downstairs during the conversation and was leaning against the kitchen door frame in his bathrobe, watching her face read the situation. "They went to the press," she said. He nodded like he'd been expecting it. "That's what they do first. They make you the story." Vivi pulled up her contacts and found the name she'd written down the night before after Barry Ostroff's recommendation. Jerome Price. Atlanta-based civil rights attorney with 20 years of experience and a reputation that Ostroff had described in 3 words: thorough, aggressive, effective. Price picked up on the 3rd ring. She gave him the same briefing she had given Ostroff: tight, sequential, nothing wasted. When she finished, he asked 4 questions. Short, sharp, precise. Did she have medical documentation? Yes. Was the footage time-stamped and unedited? Yes. Were there any prior complaints against the officer on public record? Unknown but suspected. Had she filed with the DOJ? Yes. Confirmation number in hand. "Send me everything," Price said. "All of it. I want the footage, the medical report, the complaint confirmation, the photographs, and the Gazette article." A brief pause. "If what you're describing is accurate, and I have no reason to think it isn't, this is not a difficult case. What it is a dirty fight. These men have been running this playbook for a long time, and they are comfortable with it." "How long will it take to review?" Vivi asked. "Give me 2 hours." He called back in 90 minutes. He was taking the case. That evening, Vivi, Reggie, and Jerome Price were on a 3-way call at the kitchen table. Price had already begun pulling Wixon's public complaint history from city records. What he was finding, he said carefully, suggested a pattern that went back much further than 2 years. When the call ended, the house was quiet. Reggie poured them both a glass of water and sat back down. Outside, Elm Street was dark and still. Vivi looked at her mother's photograph on the wall. Wixon thought he had killed this story before it could breathe. He had no idea it had just learned to run. The call came at 7 in the evening. Vivi was at the kitchen table reviewing the documents Jerome Price had sent over when her phone buzzed. "Erica Hadley." She picked up immediately. "They pulled me over." Erica's voice was unsteady in a way it hadn't been before. Thin at the edges, like something was pulling it apart. 20 minutes ago, right outside my apartment complex." Vivi set her pen down. "Which officer?" "The young one. Armin. He was alone." A shaky breath. "His dash cam wasn't working. He said it was a technical issue." "Of course it was. What did he cite you for?" Erica let out a short, humorless sound. 3 things: failure to signal a lane change, expired registration, and a cracked windshield. A pause. "Vivi, my registration is current. I renewed it in July. I have the receipt on my refrigerator right now." Vivi stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, Elm Street was quiet and amber under the streetlights. She kept her voice calm. "Did he say anything else?" "He didn't have to." Erica's voice dropped lower. "He just stood there with that look, like he was enjoying it." like he wanted me to know exactly why he was there. Another pause, and when she spoke again, there was something underneath the fear, something raw and tired. I have a 6-year-old, Vivi. I work 2 jobs. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Vivi pressed her hand flat against the window frame and stared at the street below. This was the part they didn't show in the headlines. Not the dramatic confrontation, not the moment of visible cruelty that got filmed and shared. This part, the quiet, grinding, targeted pressure, applied to the most vulnerable person in the chain. Wixon didn't need to come for Erica himself. He just needed her to disappear, to decide it wasn't worth it, to delete the footage and go back to her 2 jobs and her 6-year-old and pretend she hadn't seen anything on Madison Avenue 2 days ago. It was efficient, it was cruel, and it worked. That was the worst part. It worked all the time on people who had every reason in the world to protect themselves instead of strangers. Vivi turned away from the window. Erica. Her voice was steady and deliberate. I need you to listen to me. What Armin just did, citing you on fabricated violations the day after you filmed that footage, that is witness intimidation. That is a crime. And we are going to add it to the case. She paused. But I need you to hold on. Can you give me 72 hours? Silence on the other end. They know where I live, Erica said quietly. I know. Vivi didn't dress it up. Erica was too smart for that, and had been through too much in the last 48 hours to deserve anything less than the truth. They are trying to scare you because you are the witness. That means you matter. That means what you filmed matters. A beat. They will not touch you. I promise you that. But I need 72 hours. A long pause. Then, okay, Erica said. Okay. Vivi hung up and immediately called Jerome Price. He picked up on the first ring. She told him everything. The stop, Armin alone, the malfunctioning dash cam, the fabricated registration violation. Price was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a new edge to it. Sharper. Focused. The registration is the mistake, he said. If she has documentation showing it was renewed in July, that citation is provably false. That is not a gray area. That is an officer of the law filing a fraudulent citation against a material witness. Another pause. I'm adding Erica Hadley to this case tonight. Send her my number. Vivi sent it before she was even off the phone with him. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after the calls ended. Reggie was in the living room, and she could hear the low murmur of the television. The house smelled like the coffee she'd let go cold on the counter. She thought about Erica's voice, that thin, fraying edge in it. 29 years old, working 2 jobs, raising a daughter, and now carrying something that no one had asked her permission to hand her. She thought about all the Ericas that came before, the ones who had no one to call, the ones who deleted the footage, the ones the machine had successfully ground down into silence. She picked up her cold coffee and poured it down the sink. Not this time. Vivi came downstairs at 7 in the morning and found Reggie already at the kitchen table. His coffee was in front of him, untouched and cold. He was still in his pajamas, both hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. Not the wall, not the window, nothing. The look on his face was the look of a man who had made a decision in the night and was still sitting with the weight of it. Vivi poured herself a cup and sat across from him. She didn't say anything. She had learned, growing up with Reggie, that he couldn't be pulled toward a thing. He had to arrive at it himself, in his own time. She waited. He spoke without looking up. In 2009, he said, there was a young man named Zeke Tully. Vivi went still. 24 years old. Worked at the hardware store on 5th Street. Good kid. Everybody knew him. Reggie's voice was flat and careful. the way voices get when they've been rehearsing something for a long time and are finally saying it out loud. He got pulled over one night in August, 3 blocks from his mother's house. A pause. He didn't make it home. The kitchen was completely quiet. Wixon was on scene, Reggie said. He was a patrol officer back then. There were 2 others with him, but Wixon was the one. He stopped, started again. I was there. I just left a school board meeting, and I was driving home on that same street. I saw the lights. I pulled over because something felt wrong. His jaw tightened. Something was wrong. Vivi set her cup down slowly. I gave a statement, Reggie said. Told them exactly what I saw. Names, times, the whole thing. He finally looked up at her. His eyes were dry, but hollowed out in a way that was harder to look at than tears. My statement disappeared. Gone. Like it never existed. And then one of Landell's people came by the school, not threatening, nothing you could point to. Just a friendly visit to say how much the city appreciated Principal Cross and how they hoped everything at Jefferson High was going well. Reggie, I had 400 kids in that building, he said. 400 kids who needed me to show up every morning. I had this house and Mama inside it. I watched what happened to the people who pushed back against Wixon in this city, and He stopped again, put one hand over his mouth briefly, then lowered it. I made a choice, and I have lived inside that choice for 15 years. The silence between them was vast and full of everything that had ever separated them. The 22 years of age. The different paths. The fact that she had left, and he had stayed, and what each of those decisions had cost. Vivi thought about being 12 years old and watching Reggie drive away to his own life, already a man, already shaped by a version of Millhaven she was too young to fully see yet. She thought about all the years she had spent building her career in rooms far from this city, believing that distance was the same thing as safety. It wasn't. It had never been. It had just been distance. Why now? She asked. Not accusingly. She genuinely needed to know. Reggie looked at her for a long moment. Because Mama's gone, he said simply. And you're here. And you're the first person who has ever come into this city with the kind of power to actually do something with what I know. He straightened in his chair. She used to say, you remember how she used to say it. Wait for the right moment, then hit them with everything you have. His voice broke slightly on the last word. He pulled it back. I think this is the moment. Vivi stood up, walked around the table, and put her hand on her brother's shoulder. She didn't have words for what she felt. She wasn't sure words existed for it. She just kept her hand there for a moment, solid and steady. Then she picked up her phone and called Jerome Price. He answered on the second ring. She explained Reggie's testimony in full, what he witnessed, the disappeared statement, Wixon's presence on scene, all of it. Price was silent for a moment when she finished. Then she heard him exhale slowly. I need him to give me a sworn affidavit, Price said. Today. How soon can he be ready? Vivi looked at Reggie across the kitchen. He was sitting up straight now, shoulders square, 15 years of weight beginning to shift. He's ready now, she said. Jerome Price called at 11 in the morning. Vivi was in the living room going over Reggie's affidavit. Price had sent a draft copy for review. 12 pages of careful, precise language that turned 15 years of silence into something the law could hold. When her phone buzzed on the coffee table, she picked it up before the second ring. The DOJ opened a preliminary inquiry this morning, Price said. Official, on the record. I have the case number. Vivi closed the affidavit draft slowly. When? 8:15 a.m. I got the confirmation 40 minutes ago. There was something in Price's voice she hadn't heard before. Not excitement, exactly. He was too seasoned for that. But a controlled energy, like a man who had been pushing against a locked door and just felt it give. The footage has been formally received into federal evidence. All 3 server copies logged and time-stamped, which means no one at the local level, not Wixon, not Landell, not anyone connected to either of them, can touch it. It is out of their reach. Vivi sat back against the couch cushions. For a moment, she just breathed. "There's more," Price said. "Councilwoman Walters has formally called an emergency city council session for the day after tomorrow. She's requesting Wixon's immediate suspension pending investigation. She has 3 other council members already committed to supporting the motion. Landell will block it. He can try. But here's the thing. The story got picked up overnight." Price paused for effect, and she appreciated that he let the moment exist. "National outlet, not a local affiliate. They framed it as a credentialed federal contractor subjected to an unlawful chokehold during a pretextual traffic stop. They used your title. They mentioned the clearance level." Another pause. "The comments on that article alone are going to make Landell very uncomfortable." Vivi stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, Elm Street looked like it always did. Ordinary, quiet, a little worn at the edges. The same street it had been a week ago before any of this started. Nothing had changed out there. Everything had changed in here. "What about Erica's citations?" she asked. "Dropped this morning. All 3. No explanation offered." Price's tone made clear that no explanation was needed. Someone told Armin to cut his losses on that one before it became its own separate headline. She exhaled. Reggie appeared in the kitchen doorway, reading her face the way he had always been able to read her face. She gave him a small nod. His shoulders dropped 1/2 inch, the most visible relief she had seen from him in days. After she hung up, she told him everything Price had said. He listened without interrupting, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Administrative leave," he said. "They're actually talking about putting Wixon on administrative leave? That's what Price is hearing." Reggie let out a long, slow breath. He looked at the table, their mother's table, the same one where Eleanor Cross had sat every morning for 40 years with her Bible and her coffee. And then he looked at Vivi. "Mama would have wanted to know every detail of this," he said. "She would have been on the phone to everybody she knew." "She would have made us eat first," Vivi said. Reggie almost smiled. "She always made us eat first." They cooked dinner together that evening for the first time since Vivi had arrived. Nothing elaborate. They ate at the kitchen table and talked about Eleanor. Not about the estate or the paperwork or the machine that had been grinding against their family for decades. About her, who she was, the way she laughed, the way she could end an argument with a single look, the way she had kept this house standing through every season this city had thrown at her. It was the best evening Vivi had spent in Millhaven in years. She went to bed that night feeling something she hadn't felt since before the traffic stop. Something light and almost unfamiliar. She felt like it might actually be over. She lay in her mother's bedroom in the dark, listening to the quiet of Elm Street, and let herself believe, just for one night, that the worst was behind them. She was wrong. By morning, Mayor Landell would make sure of it. Vivi's phone rang at 6:15 in the morning. She was still in bed, not quite asleep, watching the early light come through her mother's floral curtains. She reached for the phone without sitting up. Jerome Price. She pressed it to her ear. "Talk to me," she said. "Landell moved last night." Price's voice was measured but tight, the way it got when he was controlling something he didn't want to show. "He contacted the private contracting firm that administers your Pentagon clearance. Not the Pentagon directly. The civilian intermediary, Whitmore Defense Partners." Vivi sat up. He filed a formal security concern citing your conduct during an active law enforcement encounter. The language is vague enough to be legally deniable, but specific enough to trigger their liability protocols. Price paused. Whitmore suspended your clearance access this morning pending administrative review. Your badge has been deactivated. The room was very still. They can do that, she asked. She already knew the answer. She just needed a second. A formal security concern from any official source triggers an automatic review. They don't investigate first. They suspend first and investigate after. It's how the system is designed. Another pause. Without an active credentialed contractor as the central complainant, the DOJ inquiry loses its primary anchor. It doesn't close, but it stalls. Significantly. Vivi got out of bed and walked to the window. Elm Street below was just beginning to wake up. A man walking a dog. A woman getting into her car. Everything ordinary. Everything untouched by what was happening inside this house. He didn't go after the case, she said quietly. He went after you, Price confirmed. Specifically, he went after what makes you credible. Without the clearance, without the active contractor status, you become easier to reframe. You're no longer a Pentagon analyst who was assaulted during a pretextual stop. You're a suspended contractor with a grievance. He let that sit for a moment. I'm sorry, Vivian. This is a sophisticated move. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass of the window. There's more, Price said, which was the last thing she wanted to hear. Landell leaked the suspension to the press, all of it. The clearance review, the administrative hold, your name. A beat. It's already running. She opened her laptop on the dresser. The story was everywhere. Every local outlet had it, and 2 regional ones. The headlines were nearly identical. Pentagon suspends, young contractor following police dispute. Young. That word, exactly where Walters had warned her it would end up. Without context, without the chokehold footage, without the medical report, without 15 years of Wixon's buried complaints, it read like a story about an impulsive young woman who had overreacted during a routine traffic stop and was now facing consequences for it. She closed the laptop. Reggie was in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. She hadn't heard him come upstairs. He looked at her face and didn't ask any questions. Her face was already telling him everything. She told him anyway. All of it. The contracting firm. The suspended clearance. The stalled DOJ inquiry. The headlines. She told it the same way she always told things. Straight. Sequential. Nothing softened. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. They knew exactly what to hit, she said finally. Her voice was low. Steady, still, the way it always was. But underneath it, something was working very hard to stay that way. They didn't come after what I did. They came after what I'm still building. Reggie crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't offer empty comfort. He knew her well enough to know she didn't want it. He just sat there, present and solid, the way he had always been for her. She stood at the window for a long time. She thought about Eleanor Cross. 81 years in this city. Every door that had been closed in her face, every system that had been designed to make her feel small, every year she had kept this house standing anyway. She hadn't done it by pretending the walls weren't there. She had done it by finding the cracks. Vivi looked down at the street. Then she looked at her phone. There was one call she hadn't made yet. One person she had deliberately kept out of this because she hadn't wanted to pull that card, hadn't wanted to need it, had wanted to prove she could handle it herself. She scrolled to the contact. General Ralph Whitfield. Retired. She stared at the name for a long moment. Then she put the phone face down on the dresser and went downstairs to wait until midnight. Some calls you didn't make until you were absolutely certain you were ready. This one, she needed to be ready for. The house was quiet by 11. Reggie had gone to bed at 10, after sitting with her through most of the evening without either of them saying much. The television had been on in the living room, neither of them watching it, just needing the noise, until Reggie finally stood up, squeezed her shoulder once without a word, and went upstairs. Vivi sat in the dark kitchen and waited. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for exactly. Maybe for the anger to settle into something she could work with. Maybe for the fear. And she was willing to name it that now, alone in the dark, with no one watching, to compact itself into something small enough to carry. She had spent the entire day moving through the house in a controlled stillness that had cost her more than she wanted to admit. The headlines still lived on her laptop screen behind the closed lid on the table. The phone sat face up beside her coffee cup. At midnight, she picked it up and dialed. General Ralph Whitfield answered on the second ring. Not groggy, not slow, fully present, like a man who had spent 40 years sleeping light and never fully stopped. Vivian, he said. Just her name. That was enough. Something in her chest loosened by a fraction at the sound of his voice. The voice that had told her, at 24 years old, in an Army intelligence briefing room, that she was the sharpest analyst he had seen in 20 years of service. The voice that had written the letter that opened the first Pentagon door. She had not called him because she had not wanted to need him. She was 36 years old, and she had built everything herself, and she was not accustomed to asking for help. She asked for it now. She told him everything, not the compressed, tactical version she gave to Price or Walters. Everything. From the afternoon she drove to the pharmacy to pick up the notarized document, to Wixon's flashlight in her face, to Armand's forearm across her throat, to the Pentagon ID held in Wixon's thick hands, to Erica Hadley filming from the sidewalk, to the rigged oversight board, to the Gazette article, to Jerome Price taking the case, to Reggie's 15 years of silence about Zeke Tully, to the DOJ inquiry opening and then stalling, to Landl, contacting Whitmore Defense Partners, to the suspended clearance, to the headlines with that word, young, sitting in them like a verdict. She delivered it the same way she delivered intelligence briefings, sequentially, precisely, without embellishment and without breaking. When she finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that she checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. It was. A small city mayor, Whitfield said finally. His voice was very quiet. Used a civilian political office to interfere with a federal contractor's security clearance. He said it slowly, like he was reading a document. Over a traffic stop. Yes, sir. Another silence. Shorter this time. Vivienne, in 30 years of service I have put a lot of people in front of general officers. A lot of people in high-pressure rooms where everything was on the line. A pause. I have never recommended anyone your age at the level I recommended you. You know why? She waited. Because I knew that when the moment came, and it always comes, you would not break. His voice shifted, still quiet, but with something underneath it now. Something that moved like a current. Do you still have the medical documentation of the bruising? Yes. The footage. Is it in federal admissible format across multiple secure servers? 3 servers, all time-stamped. Reggie's affidavit. Has Price finalized it? Final version signed and notarized this afternoon. Good. A brief pause. Don't sleep. I'll be there by morning. The line went quiet. Vivi set the phone down on the kitchen table and sat with her hands flat on the wood. Her mother's table, worn smooth in the places Eleanor Cross had rested her own hands for 40 years. The kitchen smelled faintly of the cornbread from dinner. Through the window above the sink, Elm Street was completely dark and completely still. She felt something she hadn't felt since before this started. Not hope, exactly. Something harder than hope. Something that didn't depend on how things went. Something that existed whether she won or lost, because it was built out of the simple fact that she had done everything right. She had not broken under Armin's arm. She had not broken under the headlines. She had not broken in the dark kitchen at the end of the worst day of her adult life. She was still here. And by morning, so would Ralph Whitfield. She didn't go to sleep. She made fresh coffee, opened the legal pad, and got back to work. The government vehicle pulled up to Elm Street at 7 in the morning. Vivi watched it from the front window. Black, clean, with government plates, and the particular unhurried deliberateness of a car that didn't need to announce itself. It parked in front of Eleanor Cross's house like it belonged there. 3 doors opened. General Ralph Whitfield stepped out first. He was 67 years old, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that didn't come from the military and never left it. He was not in uniform, civilian suit, no tie, but he wore it the way certain men wear everything, like it was a formality the world extended to him rather than the other way around. Behind him came 2 colleagues from the Pentagon's Inspector General office, both carrying leather document cases, and a JAG attorney named Colonel Diane Reeves, who looked like she had been awake since before Whitfield had called her. Vivi opened the front door before they reached the porch. Whitfield looked at her throat first. The bruising had faded to a dull yellow-green over the past several days, but enough remained to be visible in the morning light. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a tightening, contained and professional. "Vivian," he said. "General," she said. "Come in." She brought them into the kitchen. Reggie came downstairs in a button-up shirt, having heard the car, and stood at the kitchen threshold with the quiet dignity of a man receiving guests in his mother's house. Vivi introduced everyone. Whitfield shook Reggie's hand with both of his. "Your sister," Whitfield said, "is one of the finest analysts I have worked with in my career. I want you to know that." Reggie looked at Vivi. "I know," he said simply. They sat at Eleanor Cross's table. The general, the 2 IG colleagues, Colonel Reeves, Vivi, and Reggie. And Vivi poured coffee into every cup she owned. It was the most people this kitchen had held since her mother's repast, and for a strange, suspended moment she felt Eleanor in the room. Approving, she thought. Her mother would have approved of this table full of people with documents and purpose. Whitfield spoke first. "Here is what happened," he said, laying it out with the clean precision of a man who had spent a lifetime reducing complex situations to their essential facts. Mayor Landell contacted Whitmore Defense Partners and filed a security concern using language deliberately vague enough to trigger their automatic liability protocols without being specific enough to be legally accountable. He folded his hands on the table. What he did not account for is that the request originated from a civilian municipal office, not a law enforcement agency, not a federal body, a city mayor. He paused. Using a civilian political office to interfere with a federal contractor's security clearance is not a procedural gray area, Vivian. It is a federal crime. Title 18, Obstruction of Federal Proceedings. Colonel Reeves can walk you through the specific statutes. Colonel Reeves opened her document case without being asked. She walked them through it in plain language. No jargon, no hedging. What Landell had done, what it constituted, what the exposure was. Vivi listened to every word. Beside her, Reggie sat, very still. When Reeves finished, Whitfield looked at Vivi. "I made 2 calls this morning before I got in the car. The first was to the director of Whitmore Defense Partners. Your clearance review has been rescinded. Your access is restored, effective immediately." He said it without ceremony, like it was the only reasonable outcome, which it was. The second call was to a colleague at the Deputy Attorney General level. Not a complaint intake, a direct call. He paused. The preliminary DOJ inquiry has been elevated to a full federal civil rights investigation as of 45 minutes ago. The kitchen was very quiet. Vivi looked down at her coffee cup for a moment. Then she looked up at the photograph of her mother on the wall. Eleanor at 60, squinting into the sun in the front yard of this very house, daring the world to try something. "She taught me everything I know about this city," Vivi said. Whitfield followed her gaze to the photograph. He was quiet for a moment. "She raised you in a city that was designed to make sure you didn't have a chance," he said. "You had a chance anyway." Vivi nodded once. By noon, Jerome Price had been fully briefed and was preparing for the council session. By early afternoon, Mayor Landell's office had gone very quiet in a way that, in Vivi's experience, meant people were beginning to understand exactly how much trouble they were in. The machine was about to meet something it had never encountered before, something that outranked it. The council chamber was standing room only by 6 o'clock. Vivi arrived with Reggie, Jerome Price, and General Whitfield 30 minutes before the session was called to order. The room was already full. Residents lined the walls 2 deep. Local journalists had claimed every seat in the press row. Vivi recognized faces from the neighborhood. Mrs. Hadley from 2 blocks down, 3 men she remembered from her mother's church, a group of young people who couldn't have been older than 20 standing near the back, with their arms crossed and their jaws set. Millhaven had been waiting for this room for a long time. Vivi took her seat in the front row. She had chosen what she wore carefully: a gray blazer, dark slacks, her Pentagon contractor ID on its lanyard, visible at her chest. She was not hiding what she was. She was not softening it. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and she did not look at Mayor Landell, who was already seated at the mayor's table on the raised platform at the front of the room. But she felt him looking at her. Councilwoman Fiona Walters called the session to order at 6:30. She stood at the council podium with a composure that Vivi recognized immediately. The composure of a woman who had been preparing for this moment for 3 years and was not going to waste a single second of it. This emergency session has been called to address a formal record of conduct by Sergeant Dylan Wixson of the Millhaven Police Department, Walters said. Her voice carried to every corner of the room without effort. What this council will hear tonight is not one incident. It is a pattern. And that pattern has a history. She nodded to Jerome Price. Price stood and walked to the podium with a thick binder under his arm. He had spent 48 hours pulling public records, complaint logs, incident reports, dismissal notices, arrest records, and had reconstructed 15 years of buried history into something that could no longer be buried. He presented it methodically. 12 formal complaints against Wixson spanning 15 years. Names, dates, injuries, dismissal timelines. Harold Bell's fractured arm. Fiona Moore's son stopped 3 times in a single month. The complainant arrested 4 months after his complaint was dismissed. And all of it, every single complaint, reviewed and dismissed by an oversight board appointed entirely by the mayor sitting 10 feet away. The room was very quiet while Price spoke. When he finished, Walters called Reggie Cross to the podium. Reggie stood up slowly. He straightened his jacket. Vivi watched him walk to the front of the room and understood, watching him, what it cost him and what it meant. 58 years old, 30 years at Jefferson High, 15 years of silence that had kept him standing and kept this family intact and eaten at him every single day. He placed his affidavit on the podium and looked out at the room. He told them about Zeke Tully, about the night in August 2009, about what he saw on that street 3 blocks from Zeke's mother's house, about the statement he gave that disappeared, About the friendly visit from Landell's office to Jefferson High the following week? He told it plainly, without drama, without embellishment. The plain telling was the most powerful thing in the room. When he sat back down beside Vivi, she pressed her hand briefly over his. Then Walters called Erica Hadley. Erica walked to the front of the room in her work uniform, natural hair pulled back, chin level. She was 29 years old, and she had a 6-year-old at home with a babysitter, and she had been cited on fabricated violations and had her name posted online as a warning. She stood at the podium, and she did not shake. She connected her phone to the council chamber's display system. She pressed play. The footage filled the screen at the front of the room. Clear afternoon light. Madison Avenue. Vivi standing on the sidewalk with her hands visible. Armin's arm coming up hard across her throat. Wixon standing there watching it happen. Not intervening. Not hesitating. Watching. Then Vivi's voice cutting through the silence, steady and absolute, saying the words. Then Armin's arm dropping. Then Wixon's face reading the Pentagon ID. All of it. Every second. The chamber was completely silent. Vivi sat in the front row and did not look at the screen. She had seen it enough times. She watched the room instead. She watched the faces of the council members. She watched the journalists writing. She watched the residents standing along the walls with their arms at their sides. She watched Mayor Landell. He was staring at the screen. His face had gone the color of old paper. He could not look away, and he could not look at anyone around him. When the footage ended, Walters called for a vote on Wixon's immediate suspension. It was unanimous. Landell did not vote against it. He didn't vote at all. Vivi was at the kitchen table when Price called. It was 8:15 in the morning, one day after the council session. She had slept 4 hours, real sleep, for the first time in days, and was on her second cup of coffee when her phone buzzed. She picked it up without checking the screen. It just came through, Price said. No greeting. He didn't need one. The Pentagon statement. You need to hear this. She heard him unfold something. Paper. She set her coffee cup down. He read it aloud. It was 2 paragraphs. Clean, formal, and precise in the way that only institutions with real power could afford to be precise. The first paragraph confirmed her full name, her title, her contractor status with the Office of Special Programs, and her clearance level. It stated that the administrative review of her security credentials had been rescinded in its entirety, and that her access had been fully restored. The second paragraph noted that an attempt by a civilian municipal official to interfere with a cleared federal contractor's security status through improper political channels had been referred for active federal review under Title 18. 2 paragraphs. The weight of the entire United States Department of Defense behind every single word. When Price finished reading, neither of them spoke for a moment. How long before Wixon's attorney sees that? Vivi asked. He's already seen it, Price said. I know because he stopped returning Mayor Landell's calls approximately 40 minutes ago. Vivi looked out the kitchen window at Elm Street. An ordinary morning, a woman walking a stroller, a man hosing down his front steps, the same street it had always been. What's next? She asked. Price's voice shifted into the tone she had come to recognize over the past 8 days. Focused, forward-moving, a man who had been waiting a long time for ground this solid to stand on. Federal investigators are moving on Landell today. The documentation trail from the Whitmore interference alone is enough for obstruction charges, but when they pulled his communications records this morning, they found this wasn't his first time using his office to pressure federal contractors and law enforcement proceedings. It goes back years. A pause. He's going to be served before noon. Reggie came into the kitchen and looked at her face. She held up one finger. He poured himself coffee and sat down across from her without a word. Armin, she said, cooperating fully. His attorney made the call yesterday evening after the council footage aired nationally. Price's tone didn't soften exactly, but it became deliberate. He provided a detailed statement covering 3 years of Wixon's conduct, specific incidents, specific dates, specific names. It significantly strengthens the federal case. A beat. He will lose his badge and face criminal charges. His cooperation affects the degree, not the fact. And the other complainants? Harold Bell's case has been formally reopened by the State Attorney General's office as of this morning. So have the 2 others that were dismissed under Landell's oversight board. Price paused. And Vivian, the Zeke Tully case. The state AG contacted Reggie's attorney directly. They are treating his affidavit as a primary witness document and opening a full investigation. Vivi looked at Reggie across the table. She lowered the phone for a moment. The Tully case is being investigated, she said. State level. Something moved across Reggie's face that she didn't have a name for. It was too large and too old for a single name. He put both hands flat on the table and looked down at them, and nodded once, slowly, like a man receiving something he had stopped believing would ever come. She put the phone back to her ear. The civil suit, she said, filed this morning. Price's voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man doing exactly what he was built for. 7 plaintiffs. In addition to yourself, Erica Hadley, Harold Bell, and 5 individuals whose suppressed complaints I recovered from public record. The suit names the city of Millhaven, the police department, and Wixon personally. He paused. I expect a settlement conversation within 60 days. The number they'll need to offer to make this go away will be significant enough to make news. Vivi hung up and sat with her hands around her coffee cup. By noon, Leon Landell had been served with a federal subpoena on the steps of City Hall. By 2 o'clock, his attorney had issued a brief statement saying the mayor was cooperating with investigators. By 4, Landell had resigned. A short, hollow letter that explained nothing and satisfied no one. By evening, every local outlet that had run the headline "Pentagon suspends young contractor" was running a different story entirely. Reggie cooked dinner. They ate at their mother's table and didn't talk about any of it. They didn't need to. The house was quiet in a different way now. Not the heavy, grief-soaked quiet of the first night, when Vivi had sat on her mother's bed with the photograph and felt the weight of everything Eleanor Cross had left behind. This was something else. Lighter. Like a room after a window has been opened for the first time in years. Vivi sat on the edge of that same bed, holding that same photograph. 8 days. That was all it had been. 8 days since she had driven down Madison Avenue on a simple errand, and had a man's arm put across her throat on a public sidewalk. 8 days that had moved like 8 months, dense and exhausting, and completely, irreversibly transforming. She studied her mother's face in the photograph. Eleanor at 60, squinting into the sun in the front yard. That look on her face like she was daring the world to come at her. 81 years in Millhaven, Georgia. 81 years of navigating a machine that had been built piece by piece to make sure women like her stayed small and quiet and grateful for whatever they were allowed to have. Eleanor Cross had never been small. She had never been quiet. And she had never, not once, been grateful for less than she deserved. Vivi set the photograph down on the nightstand, exactly where she had found it. The estate was fully settled. The house would pass to Reggie. He had stayed. He had kept it standing. It was his. Jerome Price had called yesterday. His voice had carried the particular satisfaction of a man who had spent 20 years fighting for moments exactly like this one, and was now living inside several of them at once. Dylan Wixon had been arrested, not suspended, not placed on leave. Arrested. Federal marshals had shown up at his house on Thursday morning, not local officers, not city police, federal marshals, and walked him out in handcuffs in front of his neighbors. The federal civil rights charges carried a maximum sentence of 10 years. Price had also filed criminal charges in connection with the Zeke Tully case, which the state attorney general's office, embarrassed by 15 years of institutional failure and suddenly very motivated to demonstrate otherwise, had taken up with a speed that suggested they understood exactly how this looked. Wixson's attorney had already approached Price about a plea arrangement. Price had declined to discuss it. He intended to take it to trial, and intended to win. Mayor Leon Landell had not simply resigned. He had been escorted from City Hall by federal agents 2 days after the council session, when investigators executing a search warrant discovered that the security concern he had filed against Vivi's contracting firm was one of at least 11 instances of political interference with law enforcement and federal processes over his 8 years in office. His personal bank records, subpoenaed within 72 hours of the warrant, revealed payments that his attorney was now working very hard to explain. He had been charged with obstruction of federal proceedings, abuse of public office, and witness intimidation. He was currently out on a bond that had cost him his house. His brother-in-law was in federal custody. His career was not over. It had been dismantled, piece by piece, in public, in a way that left nothing intact to rebuild from. Travis Arman had lost his badge, his pension, and his freedom. His cooperation had not been as useful as his attorney had hoped, and Price had made certain the judge understood that the arm around Vivi's throat had belonged to Arman and no one else. He had been sentenced to 18 months and would serve every day of it. Price had read Vivi the sentencing statement over the phone. She had listened to the whole thing without speaking. The civil suit was moving fast. Price expected a settlement offer within 60 days, a number, he told her, that would make headlines in Millhaven for years. Her Pentagon clearance had been formally reinstated and documented in her official file, with a notation that it had been improperly challenged through civilian political interference. The Inspector General's office had opened a full review of Whitmore Defense Partners. A formal commendation from the Pentagon's Office of Special Programs was already in writing, citing her conduct throughout the incident as exemplary. The Tully family had been contacted. Zeke Tully's mother, 73 years old, still living 3 blocks from where her son had died, had agreed to meet with the State Attorney General's investigators. It was not enough. 15 years was not something that a phone call fixed. But it was a door opening on a room that had been sealed shut, and sometimes that was where justice had to start. Not with everything, but with something real. Erica Hadley had received a formal written apology from the city of Millhaven and a separate letter from the police commissioner. A new one, appointed after the old one resigned in the wake of Wixson's arrest, acknowledging the department's failure to protect her as a material witness. She had called Vivi when the letters arrived. "I'm framing both of them," Erica said. "To remember they apologized?" Vivi asked. "To show my daughter what it looks like when you don't back down." Councilwoman Walters had called that morning. She was running for state legislature. On this, on Millhaven, on all of it. Early polling already had her 12 points ahead. Vivi picked up her go-bag from the floor beside the bed. She heard Reggie's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, their mother's doorway, always their mother's, and looked at her the way he had looked at her their whole lives, like he was still a little amazed she existed. They went downstairs together and walked out the front door into the Georgia morning. The air was cool and clean. Elm Street was waking up, a neighbor pulling out of her driveway, a child on a bicycle, an ordinary day beginning the way ordinary days do, unaware of what had shifted beneath it to make it possible. They stood on the front walk and held each other for a long time. No words. They didn't need them. When she pulled back, Reggie's eyes were bright, He nodded once. She put on her sunglasses, checked the exits out of habit, and walked to the rental car. Head level, shoulders back, unhurried, unbroken. She pulled away from the curb and drove down Elm Street one last time, past Mrs. Hadley's house, past Madison Avenue, past the pharmacy she had never made it to that afternoon. Her mother's voice found her at the highway. Wait for the right moment. Then hit them with everything you have. She pressed the accelerator and drove toward the sun. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.